What is the scariest trust your gut feeling you trusted and are glad you did so? I had to leave for an appointment, and for some reason I felt the urge to just sit in my car before leaving. I sat there, just looking around for 2 minutes or so. Then the feeling went away and I left. When I was on the highway, I saw a crash happen just minutes before I was supposed to be there. Truck blew a tire, hit other cars, which hit other cars. It was a mess. 2 people died. A few others were heavily injured and had gone to the hospital. I was in the traffic behind the scene for about 2 hours and was so glad I just sat in my car, staring around before leaving. I still do that sometimes, thinking back to that moment. When I was a teen, I'd make a few bucks helping a local farmer bale hay. The hay would be stacked on a trailer and towed by a tractor to the barn. I usually sat on the front of the trailer on the way to the barn, but I suddenly felt like that wasn't such a good place to be, and moved to the back. As soon as I did, I heard a clang. The hitch had come loose from the tractor while heading down a steep hill. I climbed down the back and easily stepped off, moments before the trailer flipped over into a ravine. I used to work on a horse breeding ranch as a side gig. Your story reminds me of one of my own. I made pretty good money at the time, $20 cash an hour, working 4 to 8 hours a day. I was in town one day picking up supplies for the owner, and I was approached by a grain solo manager. Like a co-op, the guy offered me a job while talking. He managed a co-op about 10 miles away. He offered me, I think it was $28 an hour, and I told him I'd think about it. It would have been a part-time gig, so I figured, hey, sweet, more extra money. So on what should have been my first day of work for this guy, a few days later, he calls me and tells me something came up and he's not going to be able to train me that day, so to come the next day. I figured, alright, that's fine. A few hours later, the co-op blew up in a grain dust explosion that killed like 3 people. These people were all doing the job that I would have been doing. Not me, but my grandfather. He used to never wear his seatbelt. One day, he's driving around with my mom and suddenly remarks, "I feel like I'm about to go through the windshield," and buckles in. Less than 30 seconds later, as they're going through an intersection, a car blows the red light going about 40 miles an hour and slams into my grandpa's side of the car. He walked away with nothing worse than some fractured ribs, and now he always wears his seatbelt. Last year, I had 2 co-workers almost die from not wearing their seatbelts. One hit the windshield so hard with his head that he ain't the same person anymore. The other's head nailed the oh shit handle, cracked his skull. Fucked him up for quite some time. Both guys are only here today because their $80,000 new trucks had such fancy airbags everywhere. But had they just worn their seatbelts? My 3-year-old was strapped in his car seat and suddenly started saying, "Lock the doors! Lock the doors!" I pressed the button to keep him happy, but just a few seconds later, a drunk guy came up from behind the car and tried to open the doors to get in. Ours were locked, but he went to the car in front and opened theirs and started punching the driver. The lights had just changed, so that driver tore off and I followed him, leaving the drunk guy stumbling across the road. My son was tightly belted into the clunky car seat. There was no way he could have seen behind us, and he was in the back, so he couldn't see the side mirrors either. Damn, that is one intuitive kid. So this wasn't my gut, but my friend's. I had noticed whenever she had a bad feeling, it almost always turned out to be correct. We were going to sneak out one night and ride in the back of a friend's truck like we did sometimes. She told me she had a bad feeling, and I immediately backed out, and so did she. The others didn't listen, and that night the truck flipped with 2 of our friends in the back. They were both hospitalized for a couple of weeks. One shattered his arm so bad it never fully healed right, and one has full back scars from the road burn. It was in college a couple years ago that I had that trust your gut feeling. One of my buddies had invited me to a house party off campus nearby. I didn't have a car at the time, so I rode my longboard there. Rode up, and the party looked awesome, with a whole lot of noise and bumping tunes, but something just made me want to turn around and go home. Not 10 minutes later did I hear gunshots. Someone had brought a gun to the house party and shot 4 people. Sadly, 1 died, and the other 3 were pretty badly injured. My buddy had just left as I got there, and had no idea what happened, but thankfully was okay. I was on my way home when my Bluetooth headphones spontaneously disconnected. I decided rather than trying to reconnect them to just leave them out. Turns out, some weird guy was following me home. I watched from my patio as he went up and down the street looking for me. A few weeks later, a woman was attacked in the area. Serious injuries. This is why on my Bluetooth earbuds, the right one's battery is way worse than the left one's, because I rarely ever wear both at the same time unless I'm in the comfort of my own home, and at that point I just play it on my speaker. I also switch up which ear the bud is in, depending on what I want to hear. If I'm just listening for something happening but want to enjoy my music, it stays in the right ear because that's my dominant ear and it hears a little bit better. If I want to have the music in the background and be paying attention to something else, it goes in the left ear because I can still hear the music but still have my right ear to focus on whatever's happening. But it's always wild to me to see people wearing both earbuds while in a place that something terrible could happen. I literally watched a guy that I was driving behind wearing full over-the-ear headphones while he was driving down a fairly busy roadway. Not sure if this qualifies, but I used to live and work in the suburbs. One evening I was driving home at dusk and had the house to myself. Brother was out of town and my mom was at her parents'. My job was about 10 miles from my house and maybe 6 turns on a decently sized road. I'm fairly observant, and it wouldn't be odd for the same car to be behind me for half of those turns. But this time, this car followed me all the way to my residential street. I got a gut feeling I was being followed, so I passed my house and turned left. My house was one over from the corner of another residential street that was a quarter-mile loop with another small street that reconnected to mine. This car followed me as I made the loop. I then turned right to restart the loop, and it followed me again. This time I turned down the small street and completed the loop once more. It followed me one more time. As I was about to make the loop for the 4th time, they finally drove off. I drove around another 5 minutes just to make sure they didn't circle back, as I had nowhere else to park, except out in front of my house, but was creeped out the rest of the night. I slept with my door locked and barricaded, and with a big kitchen knife. I have no idea if or why they followed me. Don't know if it was a friend pranking me or if my brother put one of his friends up to it, since it's the only time that's ever happened, and it was quite coincidental that I was alone. But I also worked retail, and some of my colleagues did have records, so I just don't know. Not really a gut feeling, but my dead best friend visited me in my dream. I was in a grocery store and I ran into her. I remember I was ecstatic to see her and blabbing on about who knows what, and she just simply responded, "You're sick." And then I woke up. In a few days, I found out I had a high risk of cervical lesions and needed surgery. About 15 years back, I worked with a guy who told me that in his younger days, he attended a local youth club. One night, the guy that ran it wanted the boys to go shirts versus skins for a game of football or whatever. My roommate was to be in the skins team. He refused to take his shirt off. One thing led to another, a big drama ensued, and he got kicked out of the club and sent home. His mom and dad were not happy, and decided to scold him in response, asking why he made such a fuss. He said he wasn't comfortable taking his top off in front of the youth leader, as there was just something off about the guy. A few years later, the youth leader, Thomas Hamilton, brutally murdered 16 children and their teacher in the Dunblane Primary School. When I was pregnant, I got bit by a Lyme tick at 28 weeks. I noticed the bullseye and got on antibiotics. My gynecologist brushed it off after that. No harm done, according to her. When I went to the hospital at 35 weeks to register for delivery, I mentioned the tick, but that I took an antibiotic. Next day, they call me and tell me they wanted to induce at 37 weeks because Lyme can damage the placenta, and they would rather not risk it. I talked to my gynecologist about it, and she basically laughed it off, telling me not to induce. My gut instinct told me to go for it. So I went with the hospital's advice and had my son at 37 weeks. He was tiny, and it was a tough few weeks after that, getting him to eat and all, because he was so small and tired. The hospital sent the placenta to pathology. It was severely damaged and wouldn't have held much longer. If I had listened to my gynecologist, I probably would have lost my son. Needless to say, I switched doctors after that. I worked at a bar and had a very friendly gentleman offer to buy me dinner after we had some banter about favorite beers. I was flattered, and he was handsome. But something in me didn't feel like it sat right. Turns out, he was a serial killer, and killed a backpacker mere weeks later. Grace Mullane. Give it a Google, but proceed with caution. Police interviewed me to try and find out more about what he said. He had offered to take a few girls out before he killed Grace. Grace and I were the same age, height, and general build. I still have nightmares, and survivor's guilt some days. He also SA'd some ladies too. I'm so glad I trusted my gut that day. In the days of MySpace, a girl I knew through high school extracurriculars posted a vague warning about an active duty sailor she met online who seemed normal but suddenly wouldn't take no for an answer. I messaged her to ask if she was okay, and she told me his name, warning me not to engage with him if he tried to contact me. She then mentioned how she had been deleting some of her pics and profile details because she honestly thought he might try to show up where she worked, or even at our shared school activity. Literally the following week, I had shown up for said activity and was in the process of setting up with a few other people. The girl was in the women's restroom down a long, dark, isolated hall far removed from the primary entryway. Out of nowhere, a guy who looked high school-ish in the face, but who I had never seen before, showed up and began looking around as if he knew the place and knew what he was after. I was used to other kids around my age dropping by to visit us out of curiosity, but they would normally just stand around awkwardly until approached. This guy's level of focus struck me as extremely disconcerting, and I couldn't shake this feeling that I needed to tell the girl first, and any nearby adult as well, because I felt so weirded out. I already knew I didn't want to talk to him, so I looked at the sign-in sheet at the entryway. He was the creeper the girl told me about. As soon as I knew that he couldn't take notice of where I was headed, I booked it down the hall towards the women's restroom, where I found the girl and told her what I saw and how I knew it was him. She started crying uncontrollably, and I told her to lock the door and that I was going to tell the adults in charge as soon as I could find them. I then found two of said adults and told them what I saw and knew of the situation, including the fact that the guy in question was literally just in the other room from us, and that the girl had already locked herself in the bathroom. I was only 15 at the time. I don't know how I stayed so calm. The adults kicked right into action, escorting the guy off the premises and filing a police report. Someone I came into contact with at work semi-frequently, like every month or two, gave me the absolute creeps, but for no apparent reason. He never said anything inappropriate or did anything inappropriate, so I could never figure out why. A couple years later, it came to light that he was drugging his patients and videotaping his assault on them in his clinic. He was a family doctor. His wife found the footage and turned him in. I have so many situations like this, but this one definitely stands out. I now live by the mantra, if it feels weird, it's weird. Our gut instincts are usually spot on. Not my feeling, but my mom's a few weeks ago. She works and lives near where I do, and was also going home at lunch to meet a plumber, and she offered to drive me to my house so that I could let my dog out. I normally take the bus to work and then bus home for lunch and back, so the plan was for her to drive me home so I could walk my dog for a bit longer, and then I'd take the bus back. But when we got to my house, she said she thought it'd be better just to drive me back to work real quick, and then she would go meet the plumber afterwards. On our way back, we saw ambulances and police cars going back towards my house. I pulled up the police scanner and we realized there was a shooting at my bus stop at the time I would have been waiting for the bus back to work. This is my dad's story. My grandfather was old, but in good health. Every night, my dad used to call my grandfather, tell him he's coming over, and then go and spend an hour talking with him. One night, he had this feeling. He had to go, just had to go. He called and said he was coming. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then a series of really unlikely things happened. Walmart register transactions had some technical issues that took 15 minutes to sort out. Then there was an accident causing more traffic backup that added another delay. And then a third thing that I don't even remember what it was anymore. When my dad finally got to my grandfather's, my grandfather had died. As if he had simply fallen over in his bedroom mid-step. My dad, a physician, wonders to this day, what if he had shown up just 30 or 45 minutes earlier? I was driving down a very remote road in rural Australia. No streetlights, dead straight, pitch black. No other people for 100 or more kilometers. Somewhere between Burketown and Julia Creek in far north Queensland. The song Can't Stop by the Red Hot Chili Peppers was playing, and it repeated stop 3 times halfway through the song. My first thought was, that's weird. Why is Bluetooth messing around after it's been perfect for the last 8 hours of driving? But as I finished that thought, I had a feeling that there was something more to it, so I slowed right down. I must have got to about 60 kilometers when a herd of donkeys wandered into the road. Had I been going 120 like I was, I would have hit them no doubt, and very likely been in quite a decent accident in the middle of nowhere. I was going just slow enough to navigate them, and ended up having to swerve onto the side of the road, which was just dirt. Any faster and the car would have skidded and likely rolled. No cell phone signal, and literally no one else around. Every time I hear that song, and particularly where it repeated, I get a wicked shiver and can only think if I hadn't slowed down, it could have been a very, very poor outcome. I woke up for work one morning and was just feeling really sick. I was borderline whether it was enough to call in sick, but I decided that that's what I'd do. My colleague, who always gave me a lift to work, that same day was involved in a head-on crash with a truck that veered lanes. He survived with minor injuries, but the passenger seat was completely crumpled, seat to dashboard. At school, there was an event with a little buffet line. I was in line next to one of my classmates I didn't know very well. Nothing happened. Might have said a word or two to him. I went to sit down to my now husband. We had been dating at the time, but just not very long, and he whispered that I should never be alone with that classmate that I was just next to in line. I pushed him for more. Did he know him? He said, no, never seen him before, but he could tell that he was a bad dude, just couldn't really explain it. Later that year, we learned that he SA'd 7 classmates. My husband said he's only gotten that feeling a few times, but it always pans out. He can just read criminal sociopaths or something. So when that gut feeling happens, we listen. I was almost the first victim of a serial assaulter who pretended to be a cop. The whole night was bad for me. It started with getting yelled at for not wanting to smoke weed around a kid. The kid's mom thought I was being judgmental of her smoking. I mean, she wasn't exactly wrong, but it was illegal back then, and I didn't want to smoke around their literal toddler. Then the husband cornered me later and tried to make out with me. So I just went, screw this, I'm going home. As I'm walking home, this guy stops and asks if I need a ride. I start backing away from his car and say, no, I'm cool. So he pulls out a badge and says, I'm a cop, it's okay. I have a big bag of weed in my pocket, so I reiterate that, no thanks, I'm good. I ended up walking the long way home so I could make sure that I wasn't being followed. Oddly enough, it was a friend of my mom's who got this guy caught. He was pulling women over and pretending to be a cop, and assaulted a bunch of people. My mom's friend worked with cops and knew who they were, so when he tried to pull her over, she knew something was wrong. I didn't realize who I'd been dealing with until the news article came out about him. I am so glad that I have a rule to back away from people's cars so I'm not in arm's reach, ever. I always stay far enough away from cars that if someone can open the door and lean out, they still can't reach me. So guys, that's it for today. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this video. I'm ReddList. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.